The room kept time without me. Drip, drip. A soft metronome from the floor, steady as breath I couldn't quite catch. Fluorescent lights hummed like a trapped insect above the ICU bed, and the air smelled like metal and lemons and something I didn't want to name. A nurse pressed 2 fingers to my wrist and whispered, "Stay with me," as if the syllables could stitch a seam back together. At work I was the one who reconciled columns no one else could make agree. Quiet hands, clean numbers, the person they called when the system froze. I don't remember falling, only the carpet close to my face, gray and flecked with a blue thread I fixated on while the world tilted hard left. Someone shouted my name as if it had weight. Sirens. Doors. A ceiling that scrolled past like a dull film reel. Then this. White, bright and too still. "Her emergency contacts?" the nurse asked. "My parents." I heard my own voice answer from a distance I couldn't map, like speaking across a lake. "They called." I listened because there was nothing else to do. The nurse turned the phone to speaker so her hands could stay where they were. Measured, competent, human. "Hello." My mother's voice, cheerful, a clatter of plates underneath it. "This is County ICU. Your daughter has been admitted. We need you to come." "Oh, we're at dinner with our son and his new girlfriend," my mother said lightly as if I'd invited her to compare schedules. "Is it urgent?" She collapsed at work. "We're concerned about internal bleeding. She might not survive the night." A small silence. Then my father, "We'll pray." The line prickled in the sterile air. The nurse's jaw moved once like she was swallowing something hard. "Sir, ma'am, do you understand?" "We do," my mother said, the clink of a glass against a plate traveling clearly over the miles. "We'll come tomorrow." The monitor beside me went on counting, bright green digits pretending the world was reasonable. I watched the nurse's eyes soften with a sorrow that belonged to strangers who choose you anyway. She leaned close. "Is there anyone else to call?" There were people I loved, but love is a fragile glass and I was tired of sweeping up. I shook my head. The motion dragged a cord of pain through my ribs. The nurse squeezed my hand, professional, brief enough. In the hour that followed, I learned how a body can be both heavy and light, how breath can become a rope you grip with raw palms. I thought of birthdays I had planned for them, of meals I cooked while my brother brought home trophies for just existing. I let the facts line up like ledger entries. Debit. Credit. Balance. "Do you want to dictate anything?" the nurse asked softly. "In case you're too tired later." "Paper," I whispered. "And a pen." She brought both. I steadied my hand against the white metal rail, listened to the drip mark seconds I might not own, and began the first sentence of a note that would outlive the night. The pen felt heavier than it should, like it had soaked up the weight of every word I'd never said aloud. The paper was hospital issue, thin, crisp, a faint blue line waiting for truth to cut across it. I started with their names. Not Mom or Dad. Their full names, legal and clean. It felt colder that way, like drawing a boundary in ink. The first line came easy. "You won't recognize the person writing this." The beeping monitor seemed to listen. I could hear my own breathing hitch between sentences, my voice silent but the words still making noise inside me. For years I had been their safety net. Their quiet investment. The daughter who paid off credit cards they maxed accidentally, who booked their anniversary trip when they forgot their own dates. The one who smiled while my brother was praised for a new haircut, as if existing in his orbit was achievement enough. And yet, tonight my life could end and they chose dessert over me. I wrote about that call. Not with anger but with precision. Word for word, I repeated what the nurse had told them, what they had answered. I wanted them to see it in black and white without the comfort of memory softening the edges. The nurse came back to adjust my fore. "You okay?" she asked, scanning my face. "I'm making sure they'll never mistake what happened," I said. Her eyes caught mine for a moment. There was something there, respect maybe. Or pity. It didn't matter. I wasn't writing for her. When I paused, my hand cramped, the letters slanting slightly as my grip weakened. I closed my eyes for a moment and listened to the sounds outside the ICU curtain. Footsteps, a muffled laugh from a nurse at the station, the distant hum of a floor buffer. Life continuing indifferent. I underlined one sentence twice. "You did not come." By the time I set the pen down, the paper had more than words. It had my decision. A line they wouldn't cross back from. I folded it once, then again, tucking it beneath the thin hospital pillow where it would be found if I didn't wake up. My hand rested there for a moment longer as if sealing it into place. The nurse dimmed the lights slightly. "Try to rest," she whispered. But I didn't close my eyes. I stared at the ceiling tiles, tracing the faint grid above me, and thought about how sometimes survival isn't just living through the night. It's deciding who doesn't get to follow you into tomorrow. Morning arrived like a slow leak, light seeping through the slats of the blinds, the beeping steady, the air too clean. My body felt foreign, wrapped in tubes and wires, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I hadn't died. Not yet. But something inside me had. The nurse on shift brought a tray, oatmeal juice, a pill cup rattling with tablets. "Your vitals are stabilizing," she said with a small smile. "You're strong." Strong. That word had been my curse for decades. People assume strong means you can carry anything they drop on you. My parents had always known I'd survive. Financial disasters, emotional neglect, the casual cruelty they dressed up as tradition. And because I always survived, they never felt the need to show up. As I spooned the oatmeal, each bite thick and tasteless, I thought about the note under my pillow. It was more than an explanation, it was a key. If I lived, it would unlock the next stage of my life. If I didn't, it would be my last word. That afternoon, a social worker stopped by. She asked if I had family nearby who could help when I was discharged. I almost laughed. "I'll make my own arrangements," I told her. And I did. In the quiet hours between vitals checks, I sent emails, made calls. I had savings they didn't know about, accounts opened in my name alone. I arranged for my apartment lease to be transferred to a friend. My will was updated online with a few precise clicks. Everything I owned that mattered would go to people who had actually shown up for me. Coworkers who sat in waiting rooms during my surgeries, friends who brought soup when I couldn't stand, the neighbor who watered my plants without asking. Not a single line from my parents. That night when the ward went quiet, I stared at my phone. No missed calls. No messages. Not even a lazy, "Hope you're feeling better." And in that silence, a plan took shape. Not loud, not vengeful in the traditional way. This would be quieter. Deeper. The kind of absence that echoes for a lifetime. I didn't know when they'd decide to appear. But when they did, they wouldn't be walking into a reunion. They'd be walking into the consequences. Hospitals measure time differently. Days aren't marked by sunrises or sunsets, but by the cycle of vitals checks, the soft roll of carts down the hall, and the way the night nurses speak in half-whispers so as not to wake the fragile. 7 days passed. 7 days without them. The only visitors I had were the ones I hadn't expected. My manager, who brought a cardigan from my desk because, "You hate hospital gowns." An old friend from college who had driven 3 hours just to sit with me for 20 minutes. Even the neighbor I barely knew came by with a book she thought I'd like. Strangers in proximity had done more than the people who shared my blood. By the 3rd day, I stopped wondering if they'd come. By the 5th, I stopped hoping. By the 6th, I started imagining what it would feel like to never see them again. And the truth? It felt lighter. On the 7th day, the doctor told me I'd be discharged in the morning. My body was healing, but I'd need to rest. The nurse gathered my things. Phone charger, toiletries, the folded note still tucked under my pillow. She slid it into the pocket of my bag without comment. That night, I stayed awake longer than I should have, staring at the city lights outside my window. I thought about the years I'd mistaken proximity for love, tradition for care, family for safety. I thought about how easy it is to keep giving chances until you have nothing left but the ache of having been wrong. It was almost midnight when I heard it. 2 sets of footsteps in the hall. Slow, uncertain. The curtain didn't move, but I knew. Some instinct bristled, old and reluctant. They were here. Too late. I closed my eyes and let my breathing even out, letting the moment pass without claiming it. I wanted them to see the bed in the morning, wanted them to feel the kind of absence that couldn't be smoothed over with flowers or apologies. Because I wasn't going to be here when they finally reached for me. And when they did, they'd find only what I chose to leave behind. Morning broke in pale gold across the ward. My discharge papers were signed before most of the hospital had finished their first cup of coffee. The nurse helped me into my clothes, a soft sweater, jeans that felt loose around the waist, and handed me my bag. "You're sure you don't want to wait? I heard they might come by today," she said gently. I smiled. "I'm sure." It wasn't anger that pushed me out the door. It was clarity. The kind that arrives after you've stopped asking why, and started answering with, enough. I left the bed exactly as it was, sheets smoothed, pillow fluffed, for poles standing like a quiet sentinel. On the center of the mattress I placed the folded note. No envelope. No seal. Just the truth bare and waiting. The walk out of the ICU was slow, my body still unsure of its strength, but each step felt like a page turning. Past the nurse's station, down the polished corridor, through the sliding glass doors into cool morning air that smelled of rain on concrete. Outside, my friend Marissa was waiting with her car. She didn't ask questions, just took my bag, opened the passenger door and drove. Meanwhile, in some small slice of time behind me they arrived. I can picture it without needing to be there. My mother's heels clicking on the linoleum, my father's cautious glance into the room, the small pause when they saw the bed empty. I imagined the nurse stepping forward, telling them I'd been discharged. The way their eyes would scan the space until they spotted it. The single folded sheet in the center of the bed. And then, the moment their hands touched it, they'd expect maybe a thank you for coming, a note of forgiveness. Instead, they'd read each word I'd written in that sterile, sleepless night. Each precise sentence recounting the call, the choice they made, the prayer they offered instead of presents. By the end, they'd know. This was my goodbye. No forwarding address. No door left open. Only a silence they'd have to live inside. Marissa drove in silence, her eyes on the road, one hand loosely curled on the wheel. She didn't ask what I'd written. I think she knew it wasn't for her to carry. We passed the hospital, the gray outline shrinking in the rearview, and I felt a strange release. Like the air I'd been breathing in there had been rationed, and now I had the whole sky again. Somewhere across town they were holding that paper. I could see it in my mind. My mother's perfectly manicured fingers tightening at the edges. My father reading slower than usual, as if maybe the words would change if he took his time. But they wouldn't. I had written it without rage. No shouting on the page, no accusations in bold. Just details. The time the call came. The exact words the nurse said. The pause. The reply. And then the line I knew would stay with them longer than anything else. You taught me my worth the night you stayed at dinner. Marissa glanced at me as we stopped at a red light. You're awfully calm for someone who just walked out on their family. I didn't walk out, I said quietly. I just stopped waiting at the door. We drove to her place, where she had set up the guest room with fresh sheets and a vase of lavender on the nightstand. The kindness of it hit harder than I expected. This was what showing up looked like. No bloodline required. I spent the next few days resting, answering messages from friends who'd heard what happened. Some offered to confront my parents. I declined. That wasn't the point. Because the revenge wasn't in the note alone. It was in the living I was about to do without them. It was in taking the time they'd forfeited and giving it to people who deserved it. Somewhere deep down, I knew that one sheet of paper in that empty bed would follow them into every holiday, every family gathering, every quiet night when the phone didn't ring. They'd have to live knowing they'd lost the right to be called when it mattered most. 3 days later I got the first message. A simple text from my mother. We need to talk. I didn't reply. By evening there were 3 missed calls from my father. A voicemail I didn't bother to open. The next morning an email landed in my inbox. Long paragraphs about misunderstandings, about how life gets complicated, about how they didn't realize how serious it was. But I knew better. Seriousness isn't measured by facts. It's measured by the choice to care. And that night their choice had been a wine list, not me. Marissa saw the email on my screen and raised an eyebrow. You gonna answer? No, I said, sipping my coffee. They've had my whole life to answer. I'm done holding the line open. So I knew them. They weren't the type to let go quietly. And they didn't. Over the next week there were more messages, some pleading, some defensive, all circling the same wound. I never blocked them. That wasn't the revenge. The revenge was in letting them speak into a silence that would never break. One afternoon while I was folding laundry I imagined the note again. I pictured my father rereading it late at night, the light of the kitchen lamp pooling over the words. I pictured my mother hearing a song in a restaurant that reminded her of me, only for her mind to snap back to that cold, white bed, and the fact that she'd found it empty. That's the thing about absence. It's louder than presence when it's chosen. And now it was theirs to live with. I didn't tell them where I was staying. I didn't tell them I was getting stronger. I didn't tell them that every day away from them felt like oxygen-filling lungs that had been collapsed for years. Let them think I had vanished. Let them wonder if they'd ever see me again. Because the truth was, even if they did, they'd never find the version of me they left behind in that hospital bed. 2 weeks after leaving the hospital, I stood in a sunlit kitchen that wasn't mine but felt like home. Marissa was humming over the stove, coffee filled the air, and for the first time in years, my chest didn't feel caged. My phone sat on the counter, screen lighting up every few minutes. Another call from my father, another text from my mother. I didn't reach for it. Not once. They'd spent years teaching me how small my needs were compared to theirs. How my place in the family was somewhere after my brother's newest girlfriend, after their dinner reservations, after everything else. And I had learned the lesson well, so well that now I was applying it to them. Somewhere in their house I knew that folded note still lived. Maybe on a desk, maybe tucked into a drawer, maybe creased and worn from too many guilty readings. I didn't need to imagine the way it would feel in their hands anymore. I knew it had weight. Not just the paper but the truth inside it. They would remember the words as if they'd been etched into glass. You taught me my worth the night you stayed at dinner. It wasn't rage that had written it. It was clarity. And clarity doesn't fade. Marissa slid a mug toward me. You look lighter, she said. I am, I replied. They're carrying it now. And that was the quietest, sharpest justice I could give them. To hand back the burden they'd wrapped around me since birth, and watch them stagger under it without my hands there to hold them steady. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need closure. I had my life, my breath, my freedom. And they had the echo of an empty bed.